The novel opens with a harrowing coal oil confrontation and an overnight flight through the desert. How did you approach shaping Annie's courage in that scene so readers feel both the danger and her dignity without sensationalizing the violence?
Yes, that confrontation was difficult to write. It is actually a toned down version of the actual reported events, which had been written about by Annie's family in the past, although some of the descendants say that it could be conjecture. But out of respect for the Riggs family descendants, I toned it down a little bit, but I felt that it was important to include because it was the best catalyst, I thought, to show her obstacles. I can imagine Annie stepping out of that desert that next morning in a full view of the town with her head held high and the children at her skirts, determined to make a fresh start. But then later at Matilda's house, we see her inner turmoil because she was truly heartbroken, but she had the courage to leave an abusive husband during that time, which was unusual.
Doña Matilda's blessing box exercise becomes a gentle turning point early on. What inspired that specific spiritual practice, and how did you decide to place it where you did in Annie's journey?
I placed Matilda's blessing box near the beginning of the story because I wanted to highlight the fact that we can either hold on to the bitterness and heartbreak of the past, or we can trust God and go forward. And I know that in any given situation that's not easy, but I think that, or imagined that Matilda knew that when Annie was better, was up and around and trying to go about her regular life, that she would be tempted to wallow in all the tragedy that she had and wanted Annie to have a pinpoint where she could say, I've put this in the past, and with the Lord's help, I'm going to go forward. As far as putting things in a spiritual box, I'm not sure where that came from. It just kind of came to me, and perhaps I needed that at my time of life at that particular time.
Food, especially Annie's biscuits and peach cobbler, becomes almost a character in itself. How did you use cooking and hospitality to reveal Annie's character and her approach to building community in Fort Stockton?
Well, Annie was a true Texas pioneer, and what could be more Texan than biscuits and peach cobbler? But we women for generations have used food to show love and to bring people together. The real Annie was known for her biscuits and peach cobbler. We can't find the recipe anywhere, but it just follows suit that our Annie would be used to lavish her love on people. I mean, she had people coming to the hotel from everywhere. The hotel was not necessarily a restaurant, but people came there from town for their meals, which I'm sure helped her finances. But she just had, and you can see it still, it's there in the museum, one long dining room table, and the meal was served buffet style. And I'm sure that she had people from the stagecoach, just people coming through on horses, plus the townspeople, all gathered at her table. And I believe that fostered a real community spirit. I think that Annie's generosity in the story was portrayed in that same way, the way that she provided food for the new priest, for the school children, for the people on the stagecoach. It just demonstrated her generosity. So.
Because this story is based on a real person, it is set in early 1900s West Texas, a time and place where violence and faith coexisted in tension. What about this time period and Annie herself drew you to write this story? And how did you balance the harsh realities with Annie's real-life hope for change?
Well, I had an opportunity to work for Historic Fort Stockton for a time in the past, and it was during that time that I became just obsessed with the history. It's just fascinating. The Annie Riggs Memorial Museum, was first the Kohler Hotel, and then when Annie bought it, it became the real gem that it was during that time in West Texas, and how it is today also. But the more I learned about the town's history and Annie herself, the more I realized that her story wasn't really being told. I mean, Barney was the famous one. His obituary said, no braver or truer soul ever walked the streets of Fort Stockton. But I feel that Annie was the real brave one. She was the one that was true to her faith and true to herself. The violence that Annie experienced throughout her life is much worse than what I've portrayed in the book. But her willingness to keep going, to provide for her family, and even choose innovations as soon as they hit the world, showed their hope and faith reigns supreme. I mean, here is someone who had lost 2 husbands, had to work unbelievably hard, and she sees violence and hardship all around her, but she still embraces the idea of advancement. She bought the first electric stove in Pecos County, and when cars became available, but she bought one. And it is true, in reality, her name was the only woman's name on the list of investors. An article that came out in the newspaper, the Fort Stockton Pioneer at the time, the only woman's name on the list of investors, people that brought the Orient Railroad line through here. And that showed to me that she continued to hope for a better future for her family. The newspaper also reports her cattle interests and her property interests, but her faith in God sustained her and those around her. Fort Stockton is a great town. I love living here, and I feel like Annie has a lot to do with that.
Annie's relationship with Barney is complex. She loves him deeply, yet must protect herself and her children from his destructive behavior. How did you navigate writing a Christian protagonist who chooses divorce, knowing it would challenge some readers' expectations?
Oh, yeah, I knew it would be difficult and a challenge to portray a woman who chooses divorce in a Christian story. But we know that there is a lot of divorce in the world, and there's a lot of divorce in the Christian community. Christians have very strong and varied opinions about it, and we know that God in Malachi says he hates divorce. But the fact is that it happens, and Annie experienced a lot of guilt, and she needed to learn about grace and forgiveness in that area. She didn't do anything wrong, but she was abandoned by her first husband with 6 children, and then Barney had his drinking problem, and she just had to get out of it. And I wanted women to know that they could get out of a situation where they weren't safe or where their children weren't safe, and that there is grace and forgiveness, that you can survive and go forward with the Lord's help. And I just didn't want the Riggs family to be uncomfortable about it, but it can only be a good thing that women are encouraged to take care of themselves and their families. And I thought it was wonderful that Pelican wanted to put an abuse hotline in the back of the book, and that's a really good thing.
The character of Callie Smith, waiting faithfully for Lucius while living with profound grief, adds a poignant layer to the story. What role does Callie's story play in reflecting the broader themes of loss and perseverance in the novel?
Poor Callie. She was a completely fabricated character, but I did want to include a little bit of the Buffalo Soldier history in the story. Who would think to inform a little black woman that her husband had fallen in battle many, many miles away? Apparently no one did, and it took a while for her to find out what happened to him. Annie's typical motherly love took Callie in. I just wanted, Callie was another vehicle to show Annie's heart. During that time, there was loss and separation and racism and ignorance during the time that Annie lived. And I wanted Callie to reflect that part of the time period and to show how Annie's faithfulness to her helped to bring her around. And the stories associated with the fort have been going around in my mind for a long, long time. Maybe there's a sequel in the works, we'll see. Maybe Annie and Belle, we'll see.
Frank Hankins arrives as a mysterious drifter, and you carefully reveal his inner conflict through small gestures and reactions. How did you decide what to show readers early on versus what to hold back?
Well, we know from the beginning that Frank has come to town for revenge, but we see right away that he doesn't really know what he's doing. His alliance with Charlie becomes more and more contentious as Frank gets involved in the loving care of Annie Riggs. The flashbacks show what brought him to all that bitterness and revenge, and I'm thinking that, or my goal was that Sissy's influence possibly kept him from being totally evil. But he watches Annie's life, and at first he's bitter about that because his mother didn't have those same benefits. But he also sees that she has had heartache of her own and has still made a good life for herself. Annie's influence on him causes him to become more and more conflicted in his heart.
Annie's dream of transforming Fort Stockton, bringing education, the railroad, and a more peaceful future threads through the narrative. How did you weave her personal struggles with this larger vision for community transformation?
Well, I think Annie had in the forefront of her mind all the time the idea that there must be a better way. She did not want her children to solve problems with a gun. In reality, Annie Riggs had seen many senseless deaths, including the death of one of her brothers. But our Annie sought after ways to keep that from happening. She felt that education and faith were the answer to a peaceful, productive life. She pursued the coming of the Orient Railroad line with a passion, believing that opening up Fort Stockton to the world would bring progress, new ideas, and a better way.
Young Abel Martin pops in with groceries and nerves, and then becomes a small but memorable thread. What role do these younger voices play in modulating tension and revealing Annie's maternal leadership beyond her own children?
Well, my husband and I have 6 children, and we're working on grandchild number 17. And when the children were small, we used to say that the potential is staggering for the growth in our family. And it was the same way with Annie, with 6 children, with her first husband, Johnson, and with 4 with Barney. And then she raised Barney's son from his former marriage, 11 total. The potential was staggering for descendants, and many of them are still with us today, and I'm acquainted with a few. But imagine Annie's children and their friends and the children from town coming to the hotel, and Annie having the opportunity to just mother everyone. I think that Abel brought a little bit of portrayal of Annie's everyday life, interacting with people, but also maybe a little bit of levity. But Abel also showed some other things that were prevalent at the time. He was having to grow up without a father. His father has died. His mother is expecting. And he is having to work as a child like a man to provide for his family. And then later on, Barney Jr.'s friends come along, and you notice the way that Annie just orders them all around. That's kind of a thing of the past. But many of the octogenarians in Fort Stockton who have memories of Annie always say how generous she was and how she mothered everyone. And so I just loved including the children in that.
The early introduction of a quiet drifter asking for work adds intrigue without announcing a mystery. How did you pace the unfolding of new relationships at the hotel so readers sense both welcome and unease in this community crossroads?
Well, the idea of a stranger could always bring tension in the Old West. I mean, a stranger rides into town, and your first thought would be, where did you come from? What are you doing here? And do I need to be afraid? But Annie treated everyone as upright until she had reason to believe otherwise. She was used to strangers coming through her hotel. True colors were not always revealed right at first, but I think that in our story, everyone except for Annie could be questioned about what their true motives were, and I thought it would be interesting to see people's true heart be revealed over time. Thank you so much.